Great, so welcome. We can go to the next slide. So I want to just quickly start by introducing ourselves. So my name is Kiana Sinner, and I'm the Senior Education and Outreach Specialist at the Thurston Conservation District. And I'll be facilitating the workshop tonight and helping answer questions along the way. And I also want to introduce Jay Townsend, who is here from TCD as well. Jay, do you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Like Kiana said, my name is Jay Townsend. My pronouns are she, they. I work in the Education and Outreach Department of Thurston Conservation District. I typically do the social media management and volunteer coordination. So if you ever, follow us on Instagram or volunteer with TCD, you will likely encounter me in one way or another. So it's great to be here, and I'm really excited that you all have joined us.
Thanks, Jay. Jay will also be offering technical support during the webinar this evening. So if you have, if you're experiencing any issues or having trouble hearing or seeing or anything like that, you can feel free to reach out to Jay. They put their contact information in the chat. And do you want to just go ahead and throw it in there one more time for folks that just are now joining us?
Absolutely, I can do that. One sec.
Erica, can you go to the next slide? So what are conservation districts? So this workshop is being hosted by several different partners. So it's by the Thurston Conservation District, WSU Thurston County Extension, and the Native Plant Salvage Foundation. And we are really also grateful for our generous funders for being able to put this workshop on for our community. So folks that are funding this project include the Washington State Conservation Commission, Western SARE, and Thurston County. So here at Thurston Conservation District, we've been working with local residents since 1948. So we're actually celebrating our 75th year this year, which is really exciting. We serve residents of Thurston County who reside upon the indigenous lands of the Nisqually, Chehalis, and Squaxin peoples. We are one of 45 districts in the state of Washington, and there are over 3,000 soil and water conservation districts nationally. So if you're joining us from outside of Thurston County, or outside of Washington State, we would highly encourage you to connect with your local conservation district. And if you are here in Thurston County, you are welcome to connect with us as well. So conservation districts were formed in the late 30s as a local, place, and community-based response to natural resource concerns. Nationally, conservation districts provide incentive-based programs, education, and non-regulatory technical assistance that makes it accessible and more affordable for private landowners and individual residents to implement conservation on their property or in their homes. So all of our work, again, is non-regulatory and voluntary. And because conservation districts are locally oriented, like we serve Thurston County, we're able to build our programming and offerings around the needs of our local community. So this workshop is part of that local response to local needs. So in August, we were awarded a grant from the Washington State Conservation Commission to do focused education and provide hands-on learning opportunities, specifically around hedgerows and agroforestry in Thurston County. So we are especially excited to be working in partnership with WSU Thurston County Extension, Native Plant Salvage, Pierce Conservation District, and Xerces Society, who are also bringing additional funding from other sources as well, like I mentioned. So another exciting part of this project that our presenter, Erica Gutman, will discuss more at length during her presentation is an upcoming opportunity to participate in a hands-on hedgerow installation project that's happening actually this Saturday at Helsing Junction Farm in Rochester. And I know many of you are already signed up for that and have expressed excitement. And I know I'm personally really excited and looking forward to taking everything that we learned tonight and implementing it in real life on Saturday. And again, we'll share more details about that as we go through the evening. Next slide. So we're now about ready to jump into learning more about hedgerows, but I want to begin by introducing our presenters. So we have, first of all, Cameron Dunn joining us, who is most recently Native Plant Salvage Foundation's Learning and Outreach Coordinator and co-developed the Hedgerows How-To Handbook and accompanying templates. After nearly a decade of tech working in solutions and process design, he's eager to continue working in citizen science, environmental restoration education, or conservation technology. And he's on the job market, which is exciting. And then we also have Erica Gutman here, who has her master's in ecological restoration with a focus on the Salish Sea near shore. She has been a hands-on environmental educator for over 37 years and has led Washington State University Thurston County Extension's water resources work since 1997 through research and publications, classroom, online, and field-based instruction, and engaging thousands of community volunteer in learning through hundreds of stewardship projects, including on-the-ground ecological restoration and green stormwater infrastructure installation. Erica has led trainings for a variety of professional and general audiences, generally on a range of topics related to protecting and conserving water resources and habitat, including rain garden design and construction, which you may know her from. She's done a lot of that in our community. Erica has successfully integrated hands-on education for landowners with implementation of demonstration projects. Like I just mentioned, the rain garden, she's designed and installed over 60 in the Salish Sea region, which is impressive. She has also authored and contributed to numerous publications and videos to help landowners protect water resources. So to empower landowners to successfully implement hedgerows to achieve multiple on-farm benefits, Erica co-developed an online hedgerow toolkit for rural and working lands and co-authored a definitive hedgerow guidebook that's entitled Hedgerows for Rural and Working Lands in Western Washington, a how-to handbook, which we're going to be talking a lot about. And this is a resource that's open to all of the folks on this call this evening and to everybody, whether you're in Thurston County or not. And so welcome, Erica. We are so lucky to have you and Cameron both here. And I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away from here and start teaching us all about hedgerows.
Hello, welcome everybody. Good evening. Shall we do the poll first? Is everybody up for a little poll so we can find out who's in our big audience?
Thank you for the reminder. Yep.
Jay, can you do the poll while I just show this slide?
Yes, I will launch it right now. Here we go.
So everybody, I think you can scroll yourselves, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so this is an opportunity for us to get to know you a little bit and learn about who's on this call, because we have 93 folks on this call this evening, which is so exciting that there is so much interest in this presentation. So we will just wait for folks to answer their polls, and then we'll share out the results.
And one thing that I was confused about, because I'm old and I'm not as technologically savvy as these young people, is that you actually just scroll up and you can hit all the questions yourself as you go. So there are 5 questions, and then we'll take a look and see what people are saying.
The answers are pouring in, so I'll let you know when we kind of got a good percentage here. All right, we're about 50% participated.
Cool. It looks like people are excited about learning about the steps involved in creating a hedgerow.
Oh, good.
Interested in how to choose plants that are best for their property, which I think is a question that all of us have. You know, it's hard to know what's going to be the best fit for our space. It looks like folks are mostly rural and agricultural landowners, which is exciting. We also have some urban folks in there. Folks who are interested in implementing this on their own property, which is great, because that's what this is all about. We hope that you'll take what you learn here and on Saturday and then be able to do it on your own landscape. And it looks like most folks are from Thurston County. We also have some folks from Pierce County, Lewis County, Mason County, King, Snohomish, Kitsap, and even outside of Washington State, which is so exciting. Cool. Well, this is great, and gives us a good opportunity to kind of know who's here and joining us tonight. And yeah, Erica, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, great. So do I just click in the poll, or I'll leave that to Jay. Looks like people are still answering. I'm just going to close it. All right. And I'm going to turn my camera off. Just give me a second, everybody, while I deal with my technological things here. There we go. And I'll make us all go smaller. All right. Well, great. Thank you, Kiana. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Cameron. And welcome to all of you. It's very exciting to see so many of you here tonight. And I just first want to say that tonight's webinar is the first in a series of virtual and hands-on learning events that our partnership that Kiana just talked about, the Thurston Conservation District, the Pierce Conservation District, Xerces Society, us at WSU Extension and Native Plant Salvage. It's a part of this partnership. We're going to be offering more offerings into spring 2024, and we hope if we can get some more money, well beyond that. So over the next several months, we are definitely going to be building on the material that we cover here. This is kind of the first launch, and so we'll be talking about the most basic things in some ways. Although we're going to do some deep dives into some of the technical things that you were asking about in your things you most want to learn about, and we're going to be creating and sharing more resources for everyone who's interested in exploring the marvelous world of hedgerows and either installing one on your own patch of land or helping others to do so. And I just want to remind you that if you need help, if you need me to slow down, if you need me to clarify something, you can put something in the Q&A, and Jay and Kiana are monitoring that, and they will interrupt me if there's some kind of a problem. And of course, you can just go ahead and start putting your questions in that Q&A as well. So I see there's already one right now. Is it anything we need to worry about, or can we wait until we have a question period, Jay?
I think this will be good for a Q&A period.
Okay, great. All right. Thanks for getting that started, folks. All right. So since we have a pretty long time together tonight, I just want to give us a little roadmap to where we're heading. And we're going to start by defining what we mean by a hedgerow. And then we're going to go into quite a bit of detail on what we consider to be the benefits of hedgerows and some of the science behind those benefits. And then I'm going to just introduce you to the steps to start creating your own hedgerow by touring our new hedgerow toolkit. And this is full of resources that are available for use right now, but there are many more resources coming. Then we'll show you a little bit about hedgerow design is goal-driven. And we're going to take what we call the 4-minute stretch break. So everybody can take a quick moment, and then we'll come back. And Cameron then is going to lead us, and he's going to go deeper on what I consider to be two of the most complex ideas. And he's going to make them simple by talking about both how you calculate your plant numbers and your plant spacing. And then at the end, I'm just going to share a little bit more about some pieces that are relevant to Saturday's hands-on workshop down at Helsing Junction. So even if you're not going to join us for that, you can get some more insights by sticking around for that little bit. And of course, along the way, we'll have some little breaks for questions. All right, so with that in mind, let's go ahead and start. But right off the bat, I am going to give a little detour. And I want to just give you some background about how all this started from our perspective. So we at Washington State University Extension and the Native Plant Salvage have been working with the Thurston County Storm and Surface Water Utility intermittently for the past few years to create what we're now calling this Hedgerows Toolkit. I've got a little slowness here. Sorry about that. There we go. Sometimes there are a lot of people in the line. It's a little slow. All right. So we've been working to create what we're now calling the Hedgerows Toolkit. And Cameron and I are both going to walk you through that in a little bit. We started from a perspective of supporting agricultural producers in creating narrow buffers to protect water resources. And then our passion for the power of hedgerows just grew exponentially as we started to explore what hedgerows are and what they can do in our region. So now back to our planned itinerary and the question of what's a hedgerow. Many of you are probably familiar with the kinds of hedgerows widely used in the UK, especially. They serve as field boundaries and even property lines. There's a long history of creating and maintaining these hedgerows, and a lot of our documentation of some of the ecological and agricultural benefits of hedgerows come from these plentiful studies of these features. And even though the UK is famous for its hedgerows, one of their hedgerow types is definitely not our focus. Some folks have expressed an interest in this, and I just want to be clear that this hedge laying, which is shown here, is an ancient and really very cool method of hedging, but it's also a very labor-intensive one, and it's not one that we are going to be covering. We are actually focused on giving folks less work and not more. And by the same token, we're also not really focused on the kind of more aesthetically fussy hedgerow that you might have in a landscape right around your home. Although, of course, if you have time to make a very fancy hedgerow, they are their own delight. And I have several right around my house that, you know, are filled in with all kinds of pretty, slightly more expensive plants. All right, so we began our journey, as I said, with this focus on the agricultural and rural landscapes and trying to get these narrow buffers there. But I also want to reassure all of you who live on smaller lots and in our urban and suburban areas that hedgerows can work their magic in almost any size landscape. This is in fact a section of my own urban hedgerow, and this picture was taken about 17 years ago. It was a few years after I planted it, and you can see that it's already starting to fill in along the fence that I share with my neighbor. And here is that same hedgerow in early spring of this year. And here it is yesterday morning, as seen from my upstairs window, where you can see that it provides a complete privacy screen and buffer between my next door neighbor and me, while also providing both of us with tons of year-round color and wildlife to enjoy. Well, a hedgerow is typically centered on woody trees and shrubs. Depending on the goals, a hedgerow could also be focused on just the summer season flowers, such as this crocosmia, lavender, and rosemary hedgerow that is part of the Helsing Junction Farms landscape. And our Pierce Conservation District project partner, Allie Nichols, who you'll all meet on Saturday, is helming a grant to support many types of hedgerow templates, including some that are entirely herbaceous hedgerows. So the bottom line is that hedgerows can be designed for many different benefits and goals. They can be sized or shaped to fit in many different landscapes, and they can include a mixture of different woody plants and herbaceous plants, or just woody plants, or even just herbaceous plants. But what do we mean by hedgerow in the context of this project and this whole effort to now promote hedgerows, particularly in our more agricultural settings? We do have some biases in our definition of hedgerows, and these stem from our years of doing ecological restoration and revegetation and our green stormwater plantings, which include naturescaping. The first bias is that wherever possible, we want to incorporate a diverse palette of plant species into the hedgerows. And why do you suppose diversity is important to us? Well, if we were all in a classroom together, we could raise your hands and you could tell me. But one of the limitations of webinaring is that I'm going to just go ahead and tell you what's top of mind for me. And the first always is this habitat value. Plant diversity begets wildlife diversity. And the diversity of plants equates with diversity of roots, which then helps to retain soil. With a diverse plant palette, you're not going to be out of luck if one particular species doesn't perform well for you. The whole picture is more resilient when you include more species. And finally, more species of plants allow for more opportunities to have interesting colors and textures to enjoy every month of the year.
Hey, Erica, we got a Q&A that says, looks to me our pollinators will benefit by their diversity as well as great for crops.
Yes, indeed. We're going to talk about that a ton very soon. So thanks for sharing. Okay. All right. So our second preference in our definition of hedgerows is for the use of native and non-native but water-wise plants, which are drought tolerant once they're established, and they don't require any supplemental inputs such as fertilizers or pesticides, and they thus protect our local waterways and our groundwater. So what are our thoughts about the benefits of these native and water-wise plant choices? Well, there are many, but again, a few quick points that I think about is obviously the water conservation and protection benefits, and then support for native wildlife in particular, including those beneficial insects and pollinators that person just referenced, and a more sustainable and more resilient planting over time with the use of these plants. The next characteristic that we've built into our WSU planting templates is layering, establishing plants from as tall as is warranted for that particular hedgerow's goals, all the way down to the ground level. We want to mimic the layers of a forest, which will, once again, support our goals in providing habitat. And that would be habitat at all levels. And this will also help slow down rainwater and prevent runoff, plus providing filtration of the field runoff and more infiltration of stormwater through the dense network of roots. Although typical hedgerow designs do call for planting closely, there are some that we have seen that do not call for that. And we think this close plant spacing is a really key principle for success. When we space densely, we ensure faster knitting together of the plants, and that then speeds up the hedgerow's ability to start creating that habitat we've been talking about, to start protecting the water, and more importantly, from my perspective in some ways is it cuts down on early maintenance headaches. A denser spacing is going to fill in faster, so your hedgerow doesn't become a never-ending addition to your chore list. Another hedgerow feature is that it's typically pretty narrow. We've designed our block templates that Cameron's going to show you in a little bit to be about 15 feet wide. And our colleague Allie Nichols from Pierce Conservation District is creating templates that are even narrower. The idea is to pack a lot of value for you and the planet into a very small space, thereby taking limited land out of agricultural production or in the more urban settings to maximize the amount of space in a yard for entertaining, playing, and other kinds of gardening. So some of you are probably thinking, well, then what's a hedge? Well, both a hedge and a hedgerow will provide a privacy screen and a barrier to entry or exit, but a hedgerow offers so much more. So let's compare. A hedge is typically composed of a single species, and it's usually evergreen, such as laurel or arborvitae. And the plants are then spaced according to the directions, and over time they do knit together and they create a solid barrier. A hedgerow is a mix of evergreen and deciduous plants, and it's planted in complementary combinations. The plants are spaced much more close than is usual, up to 75% of their usual spacing recommendations. And this close spacing then creates overlapping layers and screening as the plants mature. Because a hedge is a monoculture of just one plant, it lacks the diversity that creates habitat for a broad range of wildlife, including the beneficial insects. The seasonal flux of a one-species hedge is very limited, and it therefore has a reduced aesthetic interest without the range of ongoing cycles of bloom, fruits, and changing foliage of a mixed species hedgerow. Because a hedgerow is a mixture of several different species, it's biodiverse, which leads to increases in the beneficial insects and reductions in pest insects, which then enhances crop productivity. A hedgerow is going to have a diversity of flower shapes and colors, and it's going to display for many months blooms, fruits, seeds, and changing foliage, and provide that year-round beauty. A hedge has a very formal appearance, which is maintained through a strict regimen of ongoing shearing, which can require quite a bit of time, depending on the species. And then all of the species that are trimmed up have to be cleaned up to maintain that tidy appearance, whereas a hedgerow has an informal, relaxed, unstructured, and naturalistic appearance. There should be no need for any shearing, and the annual leaf drop adds to the natural mulch in its footprint and therefore does not require any cleanup. It is in fact part of the benefit of having this hedgerow for the local ecology. Now, when it comes to maintenance with a hedge, there's kind of a forever need to keep it in check and to deal with the trimmings every growing season. While a new hedgerow is going to require that you put some hours in every year until the plants get established, with close plant spacing, they get established quickly, and then most of the maintenance is pretty short term. Here is an aerial view of one of my hedgerows, and there's absolutely no chance for weeds in all that density. The plants just do their thing, and I don't have to fuss with it at all, and I get to enjoy all the benefits. For both aesthetics and sustaining your coverage, with a single species hedge, if there's ever a damaged limb in a windstorm or some other opening, you're going to have to deal with those gaps by replanting if you want to maintain that particular kind of hedge. In contrast, the diverse plantings in a hedgerow cover up any unplanned limb removal or even dead plants, and the overall structure allows for the surviving plants to quickly fill in. Finally, because of its diversity, a hedgerow offers many layers of both woody and even herbaceous plants. And then this feature creates more opportunities for different organisms that can benefit agriculture and the filtration at the ground level for polluted runoff. The structure of a hedgerow also lends itself to trellising other plants for even more diversity. I have both hops and an evergreen pollinator attracting vine on different parts of my hedgerow. And these not only offer me a crop, but also year-round beauty. And they keep supporting beneficial insects and other wildlife by providing something different in every season. All right, let's dig into the primary reasons that people make hedgerows. All the biodiversity in hedgerows results in so many benefits that I do not even have time to share them all. But fortunately, you can dig in to the benefits in more detail and the science behind this hedgerows magic in our Hedgerows How-To Handbook, which is online. And I'll talk more about the resources in the handbook in a bit, along with some of the other features of the Hedgerows Toolkit. In our handbook, we lay out the science behind each of the primary benefits, which typically correspond to a specific goal and some specific planting guidelines. Here are the goals that we focus on. The first is crop productivity through windbreaks and more. Then we have a livestock exclusion and livestock shelter goal, followed by habitat for wildlife, pollinators, and natural pest enemies, management of dust and odors, interception of pesticide drift, flood management, conservation of topsoil and water, protecting the local waterways and enhancing fish habitat, and what we then call close to home benefits. So that's even if you live on a large farm or some other big rural site, you're always going to have areas right around your home where you can have a hedgerow that enhances your ability to enjoy wildlife, or just enhances your own vegetable garden or so forth. So the close to home benefits work for anybody in just about any size of home site.
Hey, Erica, can I
yeah.
interrupt real quick? What
Yeah.
about, the benefit of security? We have a Q&A question that says, what is your opinion on using blackthorn for a hedge as an added benefit of security in lieu of a fence?
Well, we're going to talk about blackthorn or hawthorn, and black hawthorn, is that what they mean? We actually use black hawthorn in the livestock exclusion hedgerow in order to keep the cows or the sheep from moving around once the hedgerow gets established. So yeah, things that have particularly wicked thorns are pretty great. I actually have a little hedgerow along my alleyway that's filled with Nootka rose, which is a pretty thorny creature, and it keeps people from trying to come into my yard that way. I've never had anybody come in that way. I'm sure they try to come in other ways, but not that way. That's a great question. Okay, so these are the benefits that we focus on. But what's inherent in all of these is mitigation for climate change. So even though we don't call that out as a specific goal, it's really inherent in the establishment of the hedgerows. In fact, some of our funding for this project is about making our landscapes more resilient as the climate changes. And even though we have developed planting plans that favor each specific goal, so they're very specific guidelines for each of these goals, you can see that for most of these, when you aim for one goal, you're going to see multiple benefits almost no matter what you do. All right, so as I proceed by talking about some of the science behind this, I'm going to share data from some hedgerow studies, and these will be documenting the power of hedgerows. Excuse me. You can dig into these studies if you want. They're all in the literature cited section at the back of the handbook, which is online. All right, so we're going to start with that windbreak hedgerow. Several studies support using hedgerows as windbreaks, and it's one of the most frequent reasons that people choose for pursuing a project. Strong winds near crops can diminish yields in various ways, including disrupting pollination activity and just outright damaging crops and fruits. If properly designed, hedgerows can reduce wind speed significantly over a distance of 12 times the height of a hedgerow on the downwind side, and even 4 times on the upwind side. There are studies from the UK where hedgerows are so abundant, and these show that at the wider landscape scale, the network of hedgerows can exert a significant influence on the local climate and decrease average wind speed by up to 50%. And it will also, this network of hedgerows will also moderate nighttime and daytime temperatures. Pardon me. There's strong evidence from studies in the UK and the Brittany region of France that indicates that hedgerows managed as a windbreak can improve your crop yields. All right, so depending on the kind of crop, the local climate, the soil, and the type of hedgerows, a windbreak can boost yields by just a few percent to as much as 25% within the sheltered area. And in some instances, the fruit yields in some of these studies increased by as high as 75%. And while a hedgerow disrupts and disperses wind, a properly designed windbreak hedgerow will still maintain the airflow needed for successful farming. A windbreak hedgerow may allow for an expansion of crop types, as well as enhancing production, and could extend the growing season. Windbreak hedgerows can reduce wind-borne soil erosion, which will conserve the soil, enhance the crop growth, and also make the farmers' lives easier. This is one of the reasons that the Helsing Junction farmers want a long hedgerow in the middle of one of their wide open fields. Another benefit associated with the windbreak feature is water conservation. As a result of the hedgerow providing shade and wind reduction, the crops then lose less water through evaporation and transpiration. And you can see in this little diagram that evapotranspiration increases with more wind, more sun, and the increased temperatures. And this effect is one way that windbreaks actually increase the crop yields. By blocking the shifting winds, a windbreak hedgerow can save irrigation water and water crops more efficiently. The windbreak hedgerow particularly makes overhead irrigation less wasteful by reducing evaporation and ensuring that the water is evenly distributed, because it's then less affected by that wind interrupting it. Additionally, the water is made more available to nearby crops through the retention of moisture in the diverse leaf litter that is below the hedgerow. The role of hedgerows in controlling water flows has led to their use as a natural flood management, and then that therefore reduces the soil erosion that comes from flooding. So by intercepting the runoff, the hedgerows can support increased water infiltration into the soil. And of course, this helps recharge our groundwater supplies, and then that makes water more available later for irrigation needs. Because hedgerows are densely planted with many species of plants that have various types of roots, this root network can stabilize the different levels of the soil. And the diverse root systems and the stems of the plants work together to slow water down as it runs through the hedgerow, and this also helps retain topsoil. Another advantage of the multiple species, and therefore the capacity for multiple layers of plants, is for management of both dust and odors. When managing for either of these, designs really need to include all the layers, from the canopy down to the ground cover layer shrubs, and even a perennial belt outside the woody footprint. These multiple layers of the various foliage shapes and surface areas and textures work to trap and hold wind-blown dust particles that are generated from farm operations and from unpaved roads. Dust management and odor management go hand in hand, as odorous compounds leaving livestock areas are typically attached to dust particles. And in the handbook, we describe how this works in more detail, and the ready-made templates that Cameron is going to share a little bit later provide good plant selections for achieving this goal. Along the same lines as interception of dust and odors, hedgerows can be used to intercept pesticide drift. The main reason for using a hedgerow for this would be to protect waterways, and for organic growers to avoid drift from nearby conventional growers where that pesticide drift might be migrating to their fields. The structure and the layout of the hedgerow for this purposes are quite intentional. And again, in our handbook, we share the best practices. The main design criteria for intercepting pesticide drift is, as you might expect, to specifically avoid attracting pollinators, as we don't want to bring them into a feature that is specifically designed to mitigate for pesticides. Hedgerows' inherent plant diversity supports more wildlife diversity, which benefits the crop yields. Hedgerows offer habitat to native pollinators, predatory and beneficial insects, insectivorous birds, and even the birds that prey on the small mammals that may damage crops. The woody structure and evergreen backbone of the hedgerow then can create the habitat that works with the cultivated areas nearby for all of these critical bird and insect species to rest, to take refuge from the elements, and especially to overwinter. Overwintering habitat is critical to enabling the natural pest enemies, such as these aphids shown here, to move out into the crop fields very early, and they can feed on those aphids and the slug eggs and other pests very early in the spring by having shelter and forage so nearby the crops. Hedgerows also provide breeding sites and food when crops are not in flower. Hedgerows support our more unusual beneficial native bee populations, which are the preferred pollinators for dispersing pollen. Some studies have found that the native bees were more abundant within hedgerows than in the unmanaged vegetated edges, and that 40% of pollinators found on flowers were unique in the hedgerow edges versus the weedy edges. So just because you've got vegetation doesn't mean it's supporting the beneficial insects that we want to see. Hedgerows also support our nesting bumblebees, who get most of their diet from woody plants. When properly placed, hedgerows are especially key for giving butterflies refuge from prevailing winds and providing warmth from light that's reflected from the leaves of the hedgerow. Of course, all beneficial insects can take refuge from storms and heavy winds in the hedgerow. There's good evidence that hedgerows attract pollinators into intensive farmland and export these pollinators then into the crops, which increases the yields. The hedgerows provide more nectar per acre than other important food sources nearby, such as woodlands, field margins, and pastures. Most agricultural crops that require pollinators only provide a food source for those pollinators for a few weeks. And that's why we have built into our templates this phenology chart, which then shows how you can have not just season-long color, but not season-long color, but season-long support for the pollinators and the beneficial insects, but really on the shoulders, on the very early part of the season, and again very late in the year. The diverse hedgerows for pollinators should also be designed then with an ongoing cycle of bloom and even plants that rebloom if you can find those, because these will greatly enhance the variety of pollinator species and extend how long they're going to hang out around your area to benefit your crops, again, at that very early time and at the late time in the growing season. There's a lot of natural pest enemies, and these are particularly like the little tiny wasps and flies, and these visit flowering plants to obtain nectar and pollen, and then of course they do their damage to the pests that are out harming the crops. The diversity of flower types found in hedgerows can attract and keep these natural pest enemies in the landscape, which then enhances that natural pest control. Some of the beneficial insects that you might think about for visiting flowers and providing this service include lady beetles, green lacewings, the syrphid flies, tachinid flies, and various parasitic wasps. Since the crop flowers are only available for those short periods, again, this extended bloom time of the hedgerow plants will provide forage to the insects during the gaps in crop nectar and keep them handy on your site. The diversity of plant species in a hedgerow begets more beneficial interactions and more resiliency. Research shows that the greater the structural and floristic diversity of your hedgerows, the greater is the diversity of the predators that they harbor. So hedgerows that support the predators and parasites of crop pests need microhabitats across the different layers. And that would be all the way from the tree layer down to the lowest plants, and even the leaf litter and the soil. For the most diverse pollinator and beneficial insect populations, you're going to want to seek a diversity of flower shapes and colors. And again, in the Hedgerows Toolkit, we offer many tools to explore this. When you're looking at pollinators, you also need to choose plants that serve as the host species to the larvae of important pollinators. This is a bunch of native species that are beautiful, but also are not only great for the nectaring insects, but serve as larval hosts as well. The insects are very picky about their larval host. They may be less picky about what they nectar on, but they're very picky, maybe having one or only two plants that serve as their larval host. If pollination is your main goal, you can enhance your hedgerow by cultivating a belt of herbaceous perennials outside the footprint of the woody species, as you can see here with a bunch of native plants. And we're going to be showing that on Saturday's workshop down at Helsing Junction, where we have half of some sections of the hedgerow, only half will be in woody plants, and the other half will be in herbaceous perennials. And this is a look at non-native but water-wise perennials and herbs that come very late in the season, and again then attract those pollinators and give them food that extends well beyond the growing season of most of the crops. Now let's talk about this livestock exclusion, the shelter belts. Over time, a hedgerow can save you money over the hassle of building and maintaining extensive fence lines, especially in wet fields where the posts rot out quickly. Of course, fences are needed initially in order to allow the plants time to establish. But once the plants do establish sufficiently and using the right kinds of plants, like that black hawthorn that somebody asked about earlier, then you can create a dense enough impenetrable thicket that the livestock is kept in the pasture that you want them to be in. The other great thing about exclusion hedgerows is keeping livestock out of waterways. There are specific recommendations about making your hedgerow gap-proof and livestock resistant, as well as providing the kinds of plants that will not only not poison your livestock, but actually can enhance their health. And we show you how to create what we call a shelter pocket in the hedgerow handbook. This would be a little bit of extra shade for livestock to lie down in. So you might have a very straight, narrow hedgerow, and then just a few little shade trees outside of that pocket, as you can see here highlighted in the green, or outside of the footprint of the hedgerow to give places for lying down without disrupting the hedgerow thicket. This kind of hedgerow, which we often call a shelter belt, supports livestock by providing refuge from wind and driving rain, but also it protects them from heat. The shade that the hedgerows provide during the summer can dramatically reduce heat stress, which is a huge impact in livestock, especially in young animals, but really a significant concern for all livestock. And it not only can lead to death, but it affects milk quality. And a study from New Zealand has shown that hedgerows can increase livestock growth rates, wool growth rates, milk yield, disease resistance, and even fertility. Hedgerows support water quality and healthy waterways in many ways. Again, this is the benefit of a hedgerow that got us interested in this in the first place. And then when we saw that there were so many complementary benefits, it's almost like who wouldn't want a hedgerow? But I do want to talk for a few minutes about the ways that hedgerows support waterways, because no matter where you are in the watershed, you can make a difference by interrupting the polluted runoff. So I mentioned earlier that hedgerows can interrupt that runoff. And if they're strategically placed, particularly adjacent to a waterway, they can interrupt the flow as it's moving across a farm field, for example, and then capture any sediment and any pollutants that are flowing away from that field and prevent those from entering the stream in the first place. Once you've got once within the footprint of the hedgerow, then the biological activity of the plant's roots, soils, and associated mycorrhizal fungi is going to treat that pollution. So we can trap the pollution in the footprint, and then all of the whole ecology of the hedgerow will go to town on actually processing all the pollution. And then particularly along waterways, we want to have plants that have these deep, widespread root systems like this willow that will bind the soil layers together and prevent erosion, which of course further sediments the streams. The other great thing about putting a hedgerow buffer along some kind of a waterway is that leaves and insects from the hedgerow's structure are going to drop into the waterways. And these leaves and little insects are going to support the whole food web. Now, when we're talking about protecting water, we really think about big, wide forested riparian buffers, and these do offer enormous conservation benefits. But the truth of the matter is that not all people are in a position to plant these extensive forested buffers along their stream, particularly people in agricultural settings where in order to plant a buffer that large, they may be taking out too much of their farm from production. But the good news is that within a pretty narrow footprint, hedgerows can deliver a lot of the same benefits. Not all, but a lot of the same benefits as these wide forested buffers. And I want to now share with you some studies of hedgerows that were done by my colleagues up at Whatcom County in conjunction with their graduate students at Western. The main goal of these studies was to determine the shading capacity from narrow buffers, which also that shading capacity is going to govern temperature reductions, since lower stream temperatures are critical for supporting fish runs. So what they did was to monitor vegetation height species and density at their study sites. They used what's called a hemispherical camera, which produces this kind of an image in the stream to document the effective shade. And then they tracked the daytime and nighttime temperatures. And here's what they found. What they found is that narrow but very densely planted hedgerows shaded out and cooled the waters as well as, or even better than, the wide buffers. And the key to that is getting the right architecture of plants to cool that area and hold the cold nighttime temperatures longer into the next day. So the dense shrubby vegetation that we associate with narrow hedgerows was responsible for reducing temperatures by 5 to 10 degrees in the mid-afternoon over the wider, sparser forested buffers. So let's look at some of these results here. By the way, that's ES means effective shade. And you can see, for instance, that this 180-foot wide forested buffer that has sparser plantings, more sparsely spaced plants than our hedgerow, only had a 79% effective shade, whereas just 5 feet of a hedgerow buffer with that dense plant spacing was able to provide 90% of effective shade. So let's see what these folks were monitoring up there in Whatcom County. This is one of the creeks that they were looking at, and you can see here, this is what the site was like before it was planted back in 2005. And here it is just having been planted the following summer. And now in 2007, a few years later, and here it is by 2010. So again, planted 2006, just a few years later, you can see that this complete coverage, or almost complete coverage, is provided by these properly selected hedgerows plants for this setting. So, you know, it's not surprising that they could achieve this 90% effective shade reading with plants that fill in this densely. In 2020, I took a field trip to some Jefferson County hedgerow sites with mature hedgerows serving as narrow buffers across salmon-bearing streams that cut right through some agricultural lands. So here's a before on one of the sites that I visited, and here is the after. And I could feel the difference myself between the hayfield in midsummer and just standing somewhere within proximity of that hedgerow. The second Jefferson County site was, the before was taken in 1991. And then again, I went in 2020. And you can see from this aerial view that we took that this footprint is really very narrow, but it's also very, very dense, and it completely protects the stream. In fact, it was hard for me to find the water, even when I walked right up to the edge of that hedgerow on the other side of the hayfield. I could barely see the water. So these projects that I just showed you were funded by Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. The NRCS paid for the installation, for the fencing, and NRCS will often pay for new watering systems to keep livestock out of streams. I'm going to talk about NRCS and other resources in a little bit, but I just wanted to put that little flag in your ear that there are great resources available to support these efforts. The other benefit of a narrow buffer includes cost savings, though the money that might have been spent on a really wide buffer can now instead be put into making a much longer buffer that's more densely planted. And that thereby offers more overall hedgerow benefits and this greater length of streams or waterways that are actually protected. And that dense planting leads to faster shading out of invasive species, which saves maintenance costs as well. Okay, I am going to pause here after giving this brief overview of the benefits. And Jay or Kiana, why don't you throw some questions at Cameron and me?
Yeah, we have a couple questions in the chat here. One is, do you provide any support for mushroom inoculation of plantings to help support the nutrient uptake for plantings and bioremediation of pesticide drift?
Interesting question. Well, we certainly don't provide any support for that, but we do provide resources. And to be honest, a lot, you know, if you bring in wood chip mulch, you will often kickstart that healthy mycorrhizal network. And there's documentation about that in the Hedgerows Handbook, where we look at some studies that are primarily looking at treating water quality. But we know that the mycorrhizal action will also benefit the other plant species as they they have various mutualistic relationships. But the arborist wood chip mulch, which everybody can experience for themselves on Saturday if you want to come on down, will often kickstart that system. And the definitely NRCS does provide funding for mulch as part of their support for projects such as these. You guys want to add anything to that? Kiana, Jay?
I think that
I
was
think
great.
that's great.
Okay.
Yep.
What else do we have?
Okay, we also have, do you see any issue with blackberries taking over a hedgerow early on before it becomes well developed?
I do.
I wonder
And
if that's native or.
and that's why we talk about site preparation.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to wait before you can plant, and we really like to see a clean installation, which means that you've done your due diligence and you've gotten rid of the plants that are going to be problematic. There are ways of suppressing things once you've planted, and we'll be showing some of that spot sheet mulching method on Saturday, but spot sheet mulching is not going to kill the blackberry brain. And so we really want to see that those blackberries are starved out, dug out, whatever it takes to eradicate them. And that can happen over the course of a year or two, depending on how vigorously somebody wants to go at it. But it's much better to wait and do your planting on as clean a site as you can than to rush it and then never have it get established well, because you're constantly fighting an invasive species that was already there before you even started.
Yes. Okay, going on to the next question. How do you deal with densely planted plants as they outgrow their space?
Oh, this is a question I might want to hold for Cameron.
Okay.
Cameron, do you want to take this now, or do you want to address it in a few minutes after you talk?
Well, I'm not sure that I have the answer. I know that densely planted plants, as they outgrow the space, they're sort of growing to take up the space that they have. You're looking for something to be knit together much earlier on than would be in a more naturally spaced planting. Do you have another answer for that, Erica?
Oh, I mean, I think, well, you've talked about that Japanese strategy technique.
Yeah, the Miyawaki method. If you look up SUGI, I think is the group. There's literature on that, especially in urban environments, plants growing faster, and some plants will succeed where others don't, and will sort of take up that space. You also see all kinds of phenomena in nature, like crown shyness, where trees, only grow the canopies the width that they have. So I think all of that plays together.
And then the other part I will add is that when Cameron shares his content in a few minutes, you're going to see how it's not quite as bad as I made it sound when I said that we kind of squish these plants up. The other thing is, look at nature. Plants are squished together all the time in nature. They work it out. When you look at the spacing circles that Cameron has, you'll see that we're not asking large trees to grow on top of each other. But it's an excellent question, and definitely a concern if you're thinking about a more like a tidy landscape where every plant has got its own little space and there's kind of a little gap between, and it's a very formalistic look. This is not a formalistic look. This is knitting together multiple species and creating the density that I talked about for all those benefits we just discussed.
As far as density goes, how do you keep, when you're planting your streams or waterways, how do you keep streams from becoming clogged, as kind of shown in the Whatcom scenario?
Oh, well, that's not clogged, actually. Those shrubs are just moving down. You won't plant anything that's going to grow into the water and potentially clog it. But those were showing willows, particularly at the edge. They had other riparian plants on the other side, and they're going to only go a certain distance down. They can handle the seasonal fluctuation of the water, as with the flashy conditions that we have during the winter time. So they can get their feet wet a little bit, but they're not going to grow into the water and clog it. But they will retain the soil and the keep the banks from falling in. maybe I'm not understanding the question. I don't mean to sound snippy about it. It's just that we're not talking about putting in cattails or something like that. That's going to, like really kind of suck up all the space in the water.
Yeah, I think that's a good response. Okay, how about just maybe a couple more questions?
Sure.
We have quite a few in the chat.
Keep going. We've
Okay.
got time, I think.
Okay, we got some time. Okay. Are there any issues with the hedgerow adjacent to a mound septic drain field?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, I think that anytime you're dealing with septics, there are other issues, and I think this is kind of a bigger conversation, but in the site assessment section of the handbook, we talk about, being aware of everything around, from underground utilities, overhead utilities, site distances, all that. And certainly the septics, you need to be well back from anything where roots are going to penetrate into an area that they can't. So, you just have to be mindful of siting, which is why I'm going to show you some parts of the handbook in just a second, and then you're going to kind of get a sense of that. Is there anything else that's burning for right now, or should we hold some of those for a little bit later?
Well, I've got some big questions. You might want to hold off. I don't know exactly what Cameron's going to be covering, but are there any negatives to hedgerows? And
well, not from my perspective. I mean, I guess it's only, we do talk in the site assessment. You have to be careful with property lines. And I do share my hedgerow with my neighbors. And I mean, I could keep it completely sheared and on my side of the property, but they love it too. But if you're, particularly in the urban settings, you want to make sure that you're all in the same team with that. And then, of course, if they sell their house, then whoever buys it kind of sees that that's already a thing. But in urban settings, I think you have to be more careful with property lines. And of course, sight lines. You've got to be, while they can be a nice buffer along a roadway, you need to make sure that they're not blocking the ability to see oncoming traffic and that kind of thing. But that's kind of common sense. I mean, I'm super in love with hedgerows, and every time I learn more, it just fascinates me. So I'm probably not a good person to talk about negatives, but mostly it's about being careful and siting them where they should go and not where they shouldn't go. Maybe that's the more concise way of answering.
Awesome. Erica, can you still hear me?
I can.
Okay, my computer's being a little weird. My screen just went dark. So why don't you go ahead with your content, and I'll try and get my technical situations figured out.
Okay, great. All right. Well, let's move forward, and then we're going to have our break here in a few minutes. All right. So where do you start when you're ready to hedgerow, if we can now make hedgerow into a verb, which I'm kind of promoting here? So we have created, as we have talked about, abundance of resources in the toolkit to get you started, and it's found at our WSU extension website. And really, if you just put WSU hedgerows into Google, it will come right up for you. You might first get to our Thurston County site, but you'll ultimately get to our toolkit website. The handbook is the backbone of the toolkit and the starting point for learning. And so I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, but I also want you to know that we are making more tools for the Hedgerows Toolkit website all the time, including documenting this 2-part workshop series. So over here, you can see the components of the toolkit. And Cameron and I are both going to show you parts of these soon, but let's start with that handbook. So when you're ready to plan your hedgerow, we really lay out for you all the steps you need to be successful. We start with having you define your goals, as being clear about what your priorities are drives all other steps in the process, from where you place your hedgerow to how big and tall to make it, to the kinds of plants that you're going to be choosing. We have a little detour here to help you figure out how much you can do on your own and how much help you might need from other people, but I'm going to skip over that step right now. The next big piece is the implementation plan. And this step 1, size and placement, really warrants a conversation. And we're going to cover that as part of our next webinar in this series in March. So stay tuned for that. The next major step after that is the site assessment, which I just referred to. This is critical to your hedgerow success, both in terms of its functionality and its survivability. There are lots of key steps through site assessment, and all of them are outlined very detailed in the handbook. Again, we're going to give an overview of these steps too in more detail at our next webinar. The next step I want to highlight is this budget step, because we don't get very far if we can't afford to do what we want to do. And in the handbook, we lay out various ways to save money as well as how to budget. More of this content is actually discussed in the planting section, as plant stock choices make a big difference in how much you spend. In addition, we are building out more content on the toolkit website. We have several budget examples and scenarios, including some videos where I do a deep dive into this fascinating topic, selecting the right plant types and sizes for your budget. If that's not in the weeds, I don't know what is. But believe it or not, this is complex and nuanced enough that I felt that it required a two-part lesson. So I made 2 videos, which I thought were going to be 5 minutes each, but I'm embarrassed to tell you that they're closer to 20. And these 2 parts are, first of all, talking about stock types and sizes, because not everybody understands this. And then the second part is really the influence of that type of stock and the size on your budget. We are going to get some hands-on look at these factors in real time at our workshop this Saturday, November 4th. So in the toolkit, you'll find these budget categories for consideration. This doesn't give you an actual price, but kind of lays out, depending on your site, all of the things you might have to think about. And then we have a real life small farm example. And we're going to be building this. Like right now, we only have this one, but as we do more of these, we're going to have real world examples from 2023 and 2024 that we can build out so people can see what it actually costs to do this. While we're talking about budgets and costs, let me draw your attention to some more helpful sections of the resources part of the toolkit. First, I want to make a little digression. You see there's this little Appendix C annotation here, and that's because in the handbook, everything that we've placed into appendix is live and on the website. And that's going to allow us to keep adding new resources, to fix broken links, and so on. It also is going to allow you to share resources so that we can all participate in sharing the wisdom. So we welcome new additions to make these resources more productive for everybody. All right, so back to budgets. I want you to note these 2 sections specifically: funding and financial assistance and the technical assistance. Here's where we share the resources that can really make your hedgerow installation even more affordable. We start with the public funding, and the primary source for agricultural lands funding is going to come from the USDA NRCS, or Natural Resources Conservation Service, which I talked about a minute ago. Our local and regional NRCS staff are a wealth of knowledge and support for all types of hedgerows. Next, we have our current partners for this project, both the Conservation Commission and our local conservation districts, both Thurston and Pierce Conservation Districts. And finally, our State Department of Ag is currently on this list. Now, for our private funding section, we don't have a lot just yet, but you can see this technical assistance section down here, and that's also a way to save money. That again includes our project partners, NRCS, our 2 local CD offices or conservation district offices, extension offices, Xerces Society, and the Washington Farmland Trust. All right, so that's my little budget digression for a moment. Then the next big step that we lay out in the handbook is site preparation. And there is actually a lot here. And again, we are going to do a hands-on workshop to cover this material in spring of 2024. We're actually going to go to a farm and we're going to do some site prep to talk about the different options. We're also learning more all the time about different kinds of site prep with research out of the WSU's Mount Vernon Research Station and Cornell's Small Farms Program. And so we're going to highlight some of that research in our spring webinar and hands-on workshop. The final implementation steps, just quickly, are planting and mulching, which we're going to learn about more at Saturday's workshop, irrigation, animal exclusion, and the final step, which is monitoring, maintenance, and adaptive management, which is so important. It actually has its own chapter at the very end of the Hedgerows Handbook. The other thing that gets its own chapter, as you might imagine, is creating the planting plan. So the how-to handbook covers this in detail, but for now, what I want to share is that the plant choices are driven by your hedgerow goals. As we discussed at the beginning of this talk, your top priority is going to dictate your hedgerow design, even though, of course, your hedgerow will likely provide plenty of other complementary benefits. In the handbook, we outline a plant selection process, and we've identified specific plant characteristics for each of the goals. Next, we've identified the key characteristics that are important to the various hedgerow goals. So again, these are key characteristics of specific plants. And then we grouped the hedgerow goals that share the same key plant characteristics, and we defined them in this list in the handbook. So for example, if I want to make a habitat hedgerow, I'm going to look for these characteristics, and I can learn more about them on this page to figure out exactly what they mean. So I'm looking at thicket forming or dense woody structure, shoulder season blooming, pollinator attracting, larval hosts, berries, fruit, and nut trees, and foliage or at lower and ground levels. So that's just a quick example of how that works. Okay, so now we are going to have Cameron be up next. He's going to share more tools, plus the lessons in calculating the plant numbers and the plant spacing. I did have us in mind that we would have a break here, but I don't know if we really have time for one. Can everybody power through, or do we need to have our 4-minute stretch? Of course, I can't hear you. We could do a couple more questions, but I'm kind of inclined to have Cameron move into his content. Somebody is saying thumbs up. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's have Cameron move into his content. Oh, good, you're all saying thumbs up. Oh, look at that. This is so cool. I didn't know how this could work. So we'll be done here in about 20 minutes or so. So let's have Cameron talk, and then we're going to take the rest of the questions.
Great. So as Erica mentioned, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive. She did a big overview. We'll probably have other webinars that do deep dives as well. But we just finished laying out some plants and calculating plants for the project this coming Saturday. So it's a good opportunity to go into calculating plant numbers and plant spacing. So plant counts, let me move some stuff around here. Plant counts and layout for hedgerows. These are related. I'm going to dive into how to come up with the numbers of plants for your hedgerow project and how to figure out exactly where to plant them. So the plant needs to be 3 feet apart. Drawing a 3-foot circle around each of them ensures that those circles stay 3 feet away from each other, from the center of each other. And it means you can pack things in a little more densely than you might be able to in a grid. So in the handbook, we recommend spacing, both dense and moderate spacing options for each grouping of plants, mostly based on the plant's eventual size and where it sort of occupies space in the hedgerow, as an understory plant or a large tree. So in this example, I'm using trees, tall trees, large shrubs, low shrubs, and some live stakes a little bit later on. So remember that these circles are for plant spacing. They don't necessarily represent the size of the plant itself. The tree could eventually get larger than that. It could stay quite narrow, but they're grouped into sort of average spacing for that type of plant. So first we'll lay out trees, whatever your largest space requirement is. You might be starting with large shrubs. You'll fit these within your planting footprint without overlapping one another. So each is treated the same measurement-wise. You see these are 3 10-foot circles. But knowing the qualities of your selected plants will help as we go through rounds of laying out differently spaced plants. Even here, I sort of left myself a reminder that this is going to have a larger trunk in the future. Next group has the same rule, so none of them should overlap each other. They can, however, overlap the previous larger plants. So as we lay in our large shrubs here, they're all touching each other. And you can see I'm sort of avoiding this tree and I'm packing in this tree. I happen to know that the tree on the left is going to be a conifer that'll have dense branches down to the ground for several decades. So there's not really going to be space or light for shrubs to be packed up against there, but this deciduous tree over here is going to grow a much higher canopy. The lowest branches will be a lot higher up. And so we can tuck shrubs in really close to it. So you don't have to do that for every plant, but especially between the tree layer and the next layer, it's handy to know exactly what form those trees are going to take. Then you do the same with the rest of your plants. So I come in and I lay out all of my smaller shrubs based on the spacing recommendations. I think these are a 3-foot circle. They can overlap with the previous circles, but they shouldn't overlap with each other. And then I do this again with my live stakes. The live stakes are not always treated as the smallest spacing requirement. In this case, they are, because these are going to be snowberry live stakes, which will help create a dense thicket. They might not all survive, and so they're planted quite densely, but you could be using willow live stakes to help support a bank in a riparian preservation project. And you might want to treat those more like trees. So imagine, some of these red circles being 10-foot circles, because they're going to eventually grow into trees that you want to be 10 foot apart.
Hey, Cameron.
Yep.
Can you explain what live stakes are? We have a question in the
Oh,
chat.
that is a good question. Erica, jump in and correct me, or any of you correct me if I'm wrong. But live stakes are essentially cuttings of plants that propagate really well. On the East Coast, I know willow's a common one, but on the East Coast, I know mulberry is one where, like, if you take a mulberry branch and you just shove it in the ground, you're going to grow a mulberry tree. In my experience here with Native Plant Salvage Foundation, snowberry has also been a really common live stake plant. I think one of the benefits of using live stakes is that they're quite cheap. And so you can plant a lot more of them, even if they don't all survive, and they'll just sort of take off and propagate on their own rather than using like a rooted stock. Is that
Great.
true?
That's true. I also was gonna give a plug for my overly long videos, because the first part of that video on stock types actually explains live stakes and how they work.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
That's perfect. Thank you.
So earlier, we mentioned that this little image table from our handbook, we lay out some dense spacing and moderate spacing. You can do loose spacing, lots of things, but how that would be represented in this sort of project is you'd actually just change the size of the circles. So here, these are still trees, but I'm going to do 15 foot on center for the trees. And so that's going to result in fewer trees fitting in the project, fewer trees being nestled up against one another, and resulting eventually in a more moderately spaced project. So, like deciding between dense and moderate spacing results in different numbers of plants, many variables will create different layout and outcomes. So in these are from Saturday's workshop, actually. We're going to have sections that are planted as densely as possible with all woody species, live stakes to fill in. And then we'll have other sections that have an herbaceous pollinator strip out front. And we want to give that a little space to flourish, not be shaded out, before we plant in the woody plants. And with our woody plants, we don't have as many to use. And so that resulted in this sort of layout. Lots of the same inputs, several of the same plants and species, but super different outcomes. The variables for each section, including sunlight requirements for certain species, result in hedgerows that'll look different. Some hedgerows you'll have to put plants on the sunny side of the hedgerow or the outside of the hedgerow, for example. So like in that hedgerow project on Saturday, we've created templates for 6 of our example goals that Erica highlighted earlier. We've calculated the spacing and the number of plants, bloom times, and included not only specific plant selections here, but alternatives for you to choose from. So we chose plants based on characteristics that align with the goals. So in this riparian block template, which I saw somebody earlier asked about this goal specifically, we're focused on water quality protection and a riparian buffer. So thicket forming foliage at lower and ground levels will help with livestock exclusion. Shade providing plants will help cool the water down and help create better habitat, which the soil binding and erosion control properties of some plants will also do. So we went through that list that Erica presented, which we go into detail in another tool that I'll talk about in a bit, and also in the handbook. And this helps us narrow down what sort of plants we chose for this template. Each template has an illustration of the planting at around 8 to 10 years. That helps showcase the plant sizes, the bloom and berry colors. And then on the right of each template, we note the plants chosen for that template, as well as alternatives that you could swap out for some of those plants. So a small rendered icon here helps locate the plants in that rendering. A number shows how many are in that template. And then a smaller symbol next to it we use show where the plant is on a planting plan. So this actually is the outcome of the spacing diagrams from earlier with the circles. Each of these symbols is essentially at the center of the circle. So that's why there's a big gap here, or why there's a bunch down here. It's because those were live stakes, or there was a tree here. And then we just use this symbol method to sort of help find exactly where to plant things. So you can see that the 2 Sitka spruce here can be planted right on the 5-foot and 15-foot lines in this block, about 3 foot in from the edge of that hedgerow. It's the riparian side of that hedgerow. Another way to symbolize the plants is to use initials. This is the method we're going to use on Saturday. So each plant is marked with the first letter of its genus and the first letter of its species. AA here is Amelanchier alnifolia. There's 4 of them in here. And sometimes we use the cultivar name as well. But finally, in addition to some notes about the overall hedgerow, we have this phenology diagram. So this shows the timing and the color of each plant's fruit, flower, and foliage. For example, this hazelnut will have yellow catkins early in the year. The fruit starts in a green husk in late summer, and we get brown nuts in the autumn, alongside that green foliage turning red in October. We currently have 6 templates representing the 5 goals that Erica mentioned, plus a 6th sort of top pick of our favorites, some good general plants. And we're going to add more in the future. The second tool I want to talk about in the toolkit is our plant choice table. So this is a large sortable database of Pacific Northwest and water-wise plants that are available to help you choose the right species for your projects. This is the same exact data set we used to choose for our hedgerow templates for the project on Saturday. So it's organized by name and type. You can see here deciduous, large deciduous shrubs, medium evergreen shrubs, scientific name, common name. We also show the characteristics that we use in those templates, those plant characteristics, as well as the height and width of the plants at 8 to 10 years and maturity, and tons of other information, sun and soil requirements, pollinators, wildlife notes, other uses of the plants, all sorts of stuff. So one of the best parts of it is that you can filter it down using all of this information. So let's say I'm looking for a native understory species to fill out my planting. I want it to have fruits or berries for me or the birds. And most of my other plants are summer blooming or something. So I want something really early or later would be nice. I can plug all of that in and it narrows it down to let me know that both swamp gooseberry and salmonberry are great options that fulfill all of those things. And so then I can use both, or I can choose one of those based on the other information here. So their eventual size, the flower color. I see here that this is the swamp gooseberry is a larval host. potentially for a pest predator, more thicket forming, but salmonberry has better soil binding properties, all sorts of things. So that table and those templates are both available in the toolkit, which is found on that WSU Hedgerows site, as well as our Native Plant Salvage Foundation site. And also included in that document, I just wanted to point out that everything I just went over, all of the how to read the templates, as well as a little cheat sheet for exactly how to do a spacing diagram, this is included along with those templates. So you can download this to sort of remember some of what we went over. And then I think Erica, we can answer some questions now, but Erica, I'll go ahead and pass the share back to you.
We have some great questions in the Q&A if you all are ready.
Awesome.
Okay, so one question is, you know, as far as exclusion goes, can hedgerows exclude coyotes? And how do you have any tips for excluding deer as a hedgerow gets established?
I don't know about coyotes. I imagine they're quite they're a little sneakier. But we do have, if you look at some of the density, and we have thorny and browse deterrent as one of our options, and so planting maybe a little more densely with something that is thorny might help. I know for deer, both choosing species that deer don't often browse, as well as using things like the little protective plant cylinders, which I think we might be using for this next project. What else, Erica?
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that pretty much that with deer, you just have to start with plant protectors, or some of the other exclusion strategies, short-term fencing or whatever you might need to do. For coyotes, yeah, I don't really know that there's a way of excluding coyotes. So I see what you're thinking about in terms of protecting the livestock. And that's an interesting question I have not thought about before. So I'll have to ask somebody who's smarter than me and has got a lot more experience with livestock exclusion. I've been mostly focused on crops, but some of my friends who are dealing with livestock, they actually really love the hedgerows, because when they are shifting their livestock around, when they're moving from pasture to pasture, rotating pastures, they can use the hedgerows to make different kinds of paddocks that will support the cows for this many months, and then, or sheep for this many months, and then move them to another one so that they keep that rotation going. But I don't know, coyotes, that's a tricky one.
Definitely. Here's an interesting one.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead. Well, let's do one more question. I just want to share these last things so that if that's sure. Okay.
Yep. So as far as we want to plant with dense plants together. If you want to harvest fruits or nuts from hedgerow plants, how do you accommodate harvest access without sacrificing the benefits of dense planting?
Excellent question. So there's a couple of things, and actually Cameron has drawn it. We still need to develop that into a little bit of an illustration to put on the toolkit. But if you're really focused on a crop, on a berry crop or an apple crop, for example, a fruit tree crop, nut tree crop, you really could have those on the outside of the primary dense structure of the hedgerow. And it doesn't have to be a very big space, but enough of a space that you can access those plants appropriately, and they'll still get the benefits of being that adjacent to the hedgerow, the things that I talked about in terms of the ecological benefits that then support the agricultural production. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I know Sarah Moorhead, who's executive director of Conservation District, Thurston Conservation District, she and I have talked about incorporating more nut cultivated hazelnuts, for example, and chestnuts and other things. Those could potentially be part of a hedgerow, where they could be at the edges, but maybe part of the woody structure. But I need to talk to somebody like the Michael who runs Burnt Ridge because he knows about everything that dealing with nuts and fruits, because I just don't have enough experience. So that's another excellent. The coyote and the nuts, we're going to have to see if we can integrate nuts a little bit more. We're going to put those in the questions to be resolved. Can I just show this stuff real quick, and then if folks can hang out, we're going to keep going on the questions. I just want to make sure everybody sees this really quickly.
Yes, good idea.
Okay. So the first thing is that whether you're going to be with us or not, we are going to be installing this beautiful new hedgerow right across this very windy field, and it's going to be something like that through the field. I'm not going to get into this, but you're going to see these are all the plants that we're going to be using, and we have the two templates, the ones that we've created and the ones that Allie Nichols and the Xerces Society have created. That's what the Sayer template is. And then these are going to be all of the herbaceous plants that Cameron mentioned before. So just in a nutshell, we're going to be doing 3,600 square feet of planting. We have 2 woody plant templates for a total of 919 plants, and 1 herbaceous perennial and native grasses template with 12 species for a total of 1,040 plants. We have 720 plants in our WSU template, and it comes to 74 cents a square foot. And the SARE template is 199 shrubs plus that 1,040 herbaceous, and they come in at 53 cents per square foot. We're using a lot of bare root plants, as you can see over there in that little diagram. So then I wanted to just share this part of the resources with you again, so you can dive into this on your own. There's a lot of plant resources, but the one that I want to share is this regional wholesale and specialty nursery directory. So for these large scale hedgerows, we save money by buying in bulk with these large distributors. And of course, smaller projects probably won't be able to have access to these kinds of sources. But then again, small projects, like my little hedgerow on the back of my fence didn't cost me that much because it's not a very big area and I'm using a lot fewer plants. The other thing I want to share is that under our site assessment and site prep resources, we have a lot of information on mulch. So check that out. And we're going to be diving into this more in the next webinar as well. Lots of information about mulch. And then just as far as those of you who are coming to Helsing, a couple months ago, we placed this giant tarp down, and Angie, the farmer, and Jay and I took it off the other day. So the site is ready to go. We've got this beautiful strip ready to plant. Finally, if you want to stay updated with the upcoming future webinars and the hands-on workshops that we're planning, go ahead and check out this part on our Get Involved page on the website so that you can fill out that form, and we'll keep people up to date on that. And I sort of skimmed over it, but I'm hoping we're almost done with a little video that my husband's helping me make of Angie and Jess, who are the farmers at Helsing, and they're discussing their goals. And we'll be getting that out to everybody, I hope, before Saturday. So with that, Jay, why don't you carry on with questions, please?
Yes. All right. So we're pretty close to time. So if folks, want to hop off, that's totally fine. But we do have a few more interesting questions to talk about. This one, they say they think it's awesome that there is an online living document and toolkit, but they're hoping to find out a way to purchase a hard copy or of the current, basic hedgerow handbook.
Well, we were hoping to have that too by this time of this webinar, but unfortunately we couldn't quite get the funding together for it. We need a few $1,000 to make that happen, to print at scale. That brings the cost of those down from about $20 each to, around $9 to $10 each. You can buy one of 10 for $20, and we can hook you up with that. But we are hoping to find a source of funding to print a bunch to make them available to people, and maybe we would sell them at cost. I was thinking about adding that as a question, even like how many people would be willing to pay $10 for the handbook. But look at that! Look at those 2 people.
You got some
So we're hoping to get a hard copy, but if you want to go ahead and send us a message, we will share with you the link to go to. Cameron found a place that prints them for about $20 if you just want one. Okay, we're going to tell the county that all these people said thumbs up on that. Maybe we might be able to get another grant where we can print some too.
I'll jump in. I've answered a few things by typing, so I just want to fly through a few. most recently somebody asked, we could draw these by hand, but is there a drafting program you like for this? I've used SketchUp, which is a 3D modeling and drafting program because you can actually plug measurements right in. There's also other free graphics programs online, but I do hope to make some recommendations on the site, and maybe even create some sort of not program, but how to with some of the free programs out there. I know I've showed Erica one or two of them, and she's used them for projects before. So hopefully we can create something. Also, do you recommend native plants for Northwest Hedgerows? So I just gave a little blurb, but always recommend native or what we call water-wise plants for all sorts of reasons. Good reasons for pollinators who co-evolved with these, nuts, seeds, and fruits that are good for wildlife. But specifically in this case, native plants use less water and require fewer pesticides or fertilizers because they're adapted to this climate and the soil conditions. So it's just a smart choice for the project itself.
Okay, some more questions for us, Jay?
Let's see. We just have some more like technical questions. If live stakes could become as big as the biggest trees, why not space them as far apart?
I think Cameron actually said that. It was
Totally.
maybe a little confusing, but
Yeah.
well, there's a couple of things there. First of all, we might put well, they won't be as big as the biggest trees, probably, but certainly the willows can get pretty large over time. They can also adapt to being pretty squished up. And the other thing with live stakes is that we might anticipate some mortality. However, if the live stakes are freshly cut and the site is just super primed for it, you're probably going to have a very high survival rate. But if you're in doubt, you might overplant a little bit. We often overplant a bit on live stakes because we are expecting a little bit of mortality at least.
Okay. I think that looks like it. Oh wait, I got one more quick one. Can a hedgerow be planted in a shaded or partially shaded area?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we do. I mean, we're often that's why we're trying to build out the understory section. But you'll see under the sun shade section of the site. Sorry, of the sortable plant table, the plant choices table. It actually says what their sun shade requirements are. There's one of the reasons that this works with the squishing up of the native deciduous shrubs under some bigger, maybe evergreen trees, is that a lot of our native shrubs can handle being put in the full sun when they're young, and then ultimately they can adapt to being an understory species. And Josh Parker asked a question. Sorry, I shouldn't say people's names, but he asked, how would you suggest scaling down the width of a template designed to accommodate a narrow space? We're going to work on some tools on that, but basically I would suggest that you just reduce your space and see how many of those planting circles will fit in there in the way that Cameron showed. So when I, for example, made my hedgerow along my back fence, I didn't use a 15-foot width. I've got something that varies between 6 to 10 feet. And so in that space, things are the bigger plants are all kind of in a row. And then I've got the little plants squished in between, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Josh, if you've got goals like something like privacy, that's going to point you towards evergreen species so that you have that privacy all year, and the shape and layout of those species will then lead you to make other choices about the plants, kind of cascades down.
Yeah, somebody is concerned about the fact that we're talking about very long hedgerows and talking about using the plant protectors for the deer. Those plant protectors can be quite affordable in these situations and we provide some resources in the handbook for borrowing them or actually just getting them paid for by the public funding. So if the site warrants having plant protectors or temporary fencing, that is part of what it takes to get that project done. I don't know if that person who asked that question is still around, but we don't mean to be dismissive of the concerns about a long hedgerow. And we absolutely do enormous projects all the time in restoration where we have to protect from deer, from elk, from bears, from raccoons, from beavers, from mice, from moles, from voles, all of those things. So animal protection is a big deal, and that's why we talk about it in the handbook.
Okay, we just have a couple comments here. And our NRCS cost share will usually include the browse protection, and we can cost share on fencing to exclude livestock.
Yep.
So that's, yep, that is good to know. And then just a bunch of comments saying wonderful presentation, and very happy about all the information you shared, Erica.
And also I just see that there's should planting happen fall or winter. Fall is a great time to plant. And that's why we're trying to do this now. Winter is another great time to plant because bare root plants are available in winter. So that kind of February, March time when the Conservation District has its annual plant sale, that is also a terrific time to plant because that's the only time of year that the woody bare root plants are available, and there's a lot of cost savings there. Whereas we are able to get the herbaceous plants bare root this fall, we have to wait till December at the earliest to see bare root plants coming in. And we're fortunate enough to live in a region where, for the most part, we don't have big issues with frost heave and the ground freezing. But of course, every now and then we do, and you can't plant during those periods of time. We talk about that in the handbook as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erica and Cameron, for the wonderful presentation. That was so well done. And Jay, thank you for monitoring the chat and the Q&A. And thank you to all of the folks who were able to jump on tonight. I just want to make a note that we had over 100 folks that joined us this evening. And so that's really exciting just to see the interest from our community. And we're just grateful that you all were able to spend some time with us this evening. And again, if you want to join us.
Let me add one thing about Saturday, which is I know it's supposed to be raining, but it's really good to plant in the rain. It's very good for the plants. So come on out.
Yeah, and so I was just going to add that if you would like to like any more information about Saturday's event, feel free to reach out to Erica, Jay, or myself, and we will give you that information. But otherwise, we hope to see you there and have a really good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Bye. Thank you.